China is looking forward to a new era of cooperation with the Solomon Islands after the Pacific nation announced its decision to establish diplomatic ties with Beijing. What sparked their decision? And a subway train derailed in Hong Kong during the morning rush hour Tuesday morning. What do we know so far and what remains to be discovered? Welcome to The Point, an opinion show coming to you live from Beijing. I'm Liu Xin. China welcomes the decision of the Solomon Islands to recognize the One China principle and break so-called diplomatic ties with the Taiwan authorities. A spokesperson from the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs said on Monday. In the South Pacific nation's cabin, 27 representatives voted to shift ties, 6 abstained and 0 voted against. Taiwan, however, accused Chinese mainland of using so-called dollar diplomacy and false promises of large amounts of foreign assistance to tip the scales in its favor. What inspired the decision of the Solomon Islands, and why are some critics having such a tough time explaining the shift? Joining me for the discussion in the Beijing studio are Heqian, current affairs commentator who used to work in public affairs in Taiwan, and Zhong Houtao, researcher at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Before we start the discussion, let's first take a listen to what the Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson Hua Chunying had to say on Monday.
China highly appreciates the decision of the Solomon Islands government to recognize the One China policy, break the so-called diplomatic ties with the Taiwan authorities, and establish diplomatic relationship with China. We support this important decision which the Solomon Islands has made by itself as an independent sovereign state. We believe the Solomon Islands will surely see unprecedented development opportunities by establishing and developing diplomatic relationship with the People's Republic of China, the world's second-largest economy with a population of about 1.4 billion and promising development prospect.
So let's start the conversation, and that's what the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs had to say. However, if you read some of the international media headlines, it looked very much different. For instance, the Financial Times said China lures the Solomon Islands away from Taiwan, or the UK, the Times, Solomon Islands take China's cash and sever ties with Taiwan. Bloomberg, China claims diplomatic coup. Guardian, China extends influence over the islands. So if you didn't know any better, you would think that China is the one who's calling the shots here, and that it's not a sovereign decision by the country that's called the Solomon Islands. So, Mr. Xu, let me go to you first.
Yeah.
How much agency does a nation have in making this kind of decision? I mean, how would a country make a decision as to whether it wants to establish diplomatic relations with Beijing or with Taiwan?
Yes, I think every sovereign country in the world has their own legitimate right to pursue their own self-interest-driven diplomatic decisions, and Solomon Island is not an exception. So what we have seen today in the mentioned media arena, it can reflect a kind of hegemonism attitude towards maybe a very large or very influential member of the international community. But as we have seen, the spokesperson from the U.S. government or from the neighboring Australian government, they show a very negative attitude towards Solomon Islands decision. But just as some Solomon Island Prime Minister or even the opposition leader from their country, they have articulated what Solomon Islands government decision, the decision they took, is not seen from what the U.S. government has decided in the 1979. So even though we have heard some different ideas within the political arena of the Solomon Islands, but just as the opposition party of the Solomon Islands says, they don't think it's right for the U.S. to overreact and to take revenge on the Solomon Islands.
So why, what factors prompted Solomon Islands and the cabinet to make such a rather unanimous decision, right? I mean, of course, 6 people abstained, but nobody voted against it. So, Dr. Zhong.
The key factor is its own national interest. I think the normalization between China and the Solomon Islands is in the best favor of its own national interest. For example,
what is the national interest of Solomon Islands? Yeah, explain a little bit more specifically, please.
Yeah, for example, it could join in the One Belt and Road initiative. Otherwise, maybe it would have no chance before. However, now, since the normalization, then it could have a good chance. And then another point is that it would attract more investment from Chinese mainland. Otherwise, it will have no chance. So you could find that it is indeed in favor of its own national interest.
And is there anything wrong with a country making up their decision on a independent manner? I mean, nobody pressed them or forced them to do that, obviously, not from my understanding. Mr. Xu, how much such a decision has to be respected?
Yes, I think just as we can, if we look the historical background deeper, and I think the Taiwan Second National Space issue has already existed for more than 60 years after 1949. And as we know that the extent that Taiwan can maneuver externally should be determined by the nature of the cross-strait relations at the time. So if we look back from 2008 to 2016, when the KMT, the Kuomintang and the Mine administration was on the post, Taiwan didn't lose any foreign allies for the 8 years. And I think, as Judge Meingold himself stated, the outcome is based on the mutual trust, confidence between the political foundation between Taipei and Beijing. And after Taiwan took the office since 2016, Taiwan has already lost the sixth of its external allies.
Right. Taiwan actually blamed Beijing for the Solomon Islands decision, calling the move a brazen challenge and detriment to the international order. She also said that Taiwan will not engage in dollar diplomacy with China in order to satisfy unreasonable demands. The second sentence is particularly worth further dissecting. Let's say Taiwan will not engage in dollar diplomacy with China, meaning China is engaged in dollar diplomacy. But what's the evidence to say that China is trying to buy countries such as Solomon Islands?
Actually, there is no evidence to show that China is bribing or luring or to take this kind of actions to buy Solomon Islands.
Of course, when I say buy, it's a figurative speech, meaning giving a lot of money in order to...
There is no such kind of evidence to show that. But the evidence shows that the Taiwan authority is trying to buy Solomon Islands. For example, I could give you a very exact specific evidence. The Taiwan authority donate $3.2 million to 20 congressmen in Solomon Islands. So you could...
Do we have evidence of that?
Yeah, exactly. Very specific evidence.
Okay.
So you could find that it is a Taiwan authority or Taiwan, not Chinese mainland, to buy or to take this kind of bribes.
But it's also talking about, look, Taiwan will not engage in dollar diplomacy with China in order to satisfy unreasonable demands. What did she mean by unreasonable demands? From whom? Mr. Xu, what is your understanding here?
Yes, and I think that this kind of rhetoric is very not very unprecedented between the diplomatic battles between the Chinese mainland and Taiwan. And I do think, as far as we know, that when the Chinese mainland provided some aid, some soft loan, or some contract with favorable conditions, it will always in adherence to several principles. First, equality. Secondly, it's very transparent, and now people are now pursuing the fiscal sustainability upon this project. And I do think for those resourceful countries, for those more advanced developed economy, to offer some help for the minor or for some less developing country, should not be labeled as a kind of evil act. Even Australia, even the USA has do this very similar things in the region. So I think all these kind of the rhetoric among the Western media or from the Taiwan's assertion is a kind of, they are not that used to the mainland Chinese presence in the South Pacific region.
Professor Zhong, how should we understand this unreasonable demands here?
As for this, the so-called unreasonable demand, I think the Taiwan authority have been trying to meet those kind of unreasonable demand from the so-called diplomatic partners. That means Taiwan authority try to donate or give lot of money to those countries. But for Chinese mainland, I don't think the Chinese mainland try to give those money to those countries. We set up or normalize our relationship with those countries just as Mr. Xu said, on the principle of one China principle, and another one principle is on equality. So we just want to emphasize cooperation. We don't just want to maintain our relationship just on money or something like that.
I mean, is China desperate to have to win over all of the so-called diplomatic friends of Taiwan, or, you know, how important is, for instance, a country like the Solomon Islands to China in terms of economic ties or in terms of strategic or security ties? You know, does China have the motivation to continue to run after the diplomatic allies of Taiwan?
The most important factor is that to show that one China principle is an irresistible trend in the international stage. By normalization of relationship between Chinese mainland and Solomon Islands, we could find that Taiwan is just a part of China. So I mean, the symbolic meaning is much more important than its realistic meaning.
What is the role of the United States here? For instance, there is this meeting that the Solomon Islands requested to have with U.S. Vice President Mike Pence, but he was not granted this meeting, and the meeting was supposedly to be cancelled after the Solomon Islands Prime Minister Manasseh Sogavare decided to switch from Taiwan to Beijing. Mike Pence cancelled the meeting and calling saying that Washington was very disappointed by this decision. And then U.S. Senator Marco Rubio tweeted that he would begin exploring ways to cut off ties with the Solomon Islands. So what kind of position is what kind of role is the United States playing in the whole thing?
Yes, I think from the very beginning, because Solomon Islands has adopted a so-called 100 days of a program to make a decision. So it's a very prudent and a very considerable process. So since the very beginning, the America has shown a negative attitude towards Solomon Islands to switch from Taiwan.
So they don't want Solomon Islands to switch, but can they do something to help, you know, the Solomon Islands change its mind?
Yes, we have seen that when Solomon Islands Foreign Ministry visited Taiwan last week, the Taiwan authority even invite the head of the AIT, the American Institute in Taiwan, to participate in the banquet prepared for the foreign guests. It's very awkward, and I don't think it's a very wise and a civilized sign for the Taiwanese side to pressure your so-called friend or your so-called ally by the power of the third party. It seems that the Taiwan authority didn't feel if Solomon friends can make their own decision by their own based on their own interest, but it has to cater to the willingness of Washington.
Very briefly, Dr. Zhong, what is the level of pressure on the Taiwanese authority at this moment? Because Taiwan, since taking office in 2016, she has lost a couple of six, if I'm not wrong, Taiwan's so-called diplomatic friends. Is there anything that she can do to reverse the trend? Or Taiwan people can do?
Yeah, this issue indeed exert a great influence or great pressure on Taiwan authority to show that Taiwan is an unqualified leader in Taiwan. In future, if she wants to reverse this kind of situation, the only way is to change her cross-strait policy. That is to recognize one China principle.
Okay, we have to leave it there. Many thanks to Heqian, current affairs commentator, who used to work in public affairs in Taiwan, and Zhong Houtao from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences.